Welcome to a brief summary and rules overview of Twilight Struggle. I will not cover every detail of the rules here, just enough for a new player to jump in and begin playing with the rule book handy. Twilight Struggle is a game for two players that takes place during the Cold War. One player will choose the United States and the other will choose the USSR. Throughout the game, the players will use their hand of cards to bring other countries on the board under their influence. A full game can last from 3 to 4 hours. There are 3 ways to win Twilight Struggle. First, if either player reaches 20 victory points at any time during the game, they win. Second, if the DEFCON marker is moved to DEFCON 1, the active player loses the game. Third, a player who controls Europe during European scoring automatically wins. If none of these conditions are met during the game, the player with the most victory points at the end of 10 turns wins. Victory points are kept track of on the aptly named Victory Point track. As the USSR player gains victory points, the VP token will move in the direction of the USSR player. If the US player gains victory points, the VP token instead moves in the US direction. After the initial influence chips have been placed on the board and 8 cards have been dealt to each player from the early war deck, the players will add the specified number of additional influence to Western or Eastern Europe as noted on the board, beginning with the USSR player. A country is considered to be controlled by a superpower if their influence in the country is equal to or greater than the sum of the stability number printed on the country and the amount of influence present from the opposing superpower. For example, if South Africa, a country with 3 printed on it, has 1 US influence present, the USSR player would need to add 4 influence markers to South Africa to be in control of the country. When a superpower controls a country, the influence marker is flipped to the color side of the marker. A country is considered to be a battleground country if its banner is purple. Each turn has a specific sequence of play as found on the lower left corner of the board. First, increase the DEFCON stats by 1 if possible. Second, deal cards to each player to bring their hand size to 8 during turns 1 through 3 or 9 for the remainder of the game. During the first 3 turns, only early war cards are present in the deck. Turns 4 through 7 see the mid-war cards added to the deck, and turns 8 through 10 additionally include the late war cards. Next, each player will select 1 card and play it face down. This is called the headline phase. Once both players have selected a card, the cards are flipped over, and the card with the higher number in the upper left corner is resolved first. In the event of a tie, the US player's card is resolved first. Next is the action round phase, which will comprise of the bulk of the game. Each player will alternate playing a card from their hand. Turns 1 through 3 will have 6 action rounds per player, and turns 4 onward will have 7 action rounds per player. A card can be used in one of several ways. Note that each card has a star in the upper left corner with a number associated with it. Red stars are associated with the USSR, white stars with the US, and red and white stars are associated with both. The first option is to play the event on the card if the color of the star on the card matches your color. For example, the USSR player could choose to play the event on the card if the star was red or both red and white. The event is then resolved. If the event title has an asterisk at the end, it is permanently removed from the game. Otherwise, it enters the discard pile. If the event is underlined, it stays in effect next to the board. The second option is to play the card for operations points. Ops points correspond to the value printed on the card. If the color of the star on the card does not match your color, then the event is resolved either before or after the ops points are used, decided by you. Otherwise, if the color of the star does match your color, or if it is multicolored, only the ops points are used. Ops points can be used in one of 3 ways, but only one option may be selected per card. First, influence markers can be placed. Influence markers equal to the number of ops points on the card may be placed on any country that has your influence present or is adjacent to a country you have influence in at the beginning of the action. Additionally, you may select a country that is adjacent to your superpower as indicated by the lines on the board. It takes 2 ops points to add 1 influence to a country that is controlled by the opposing superpower. However, if placing an influence marker in a country would cause that country to become uncontrolled, only 1 ops point is required to add additional influence to the country. Influence may be divided among multiple countries if desired. The next ops points action that can be played is a realignment roll. This may occur in any country that the opposing superpower has influence in. Each player will roll one die. Add 1 to the roll for each controlled adjacent country that superpower has, add 1 to the roll if the country is adjacent to your superpower, and add 1 to the roll if your country has more influence in the country than the other superpower. Whichever player has a higher roll than the other player then removes the difference between the results and enemy influence points. The number of realignment rolls performed is equal to the ops points of the card played, and multiple countries may be selected if there are remaining ops points left. For example, if the US player attempts to perform a realignment roll in Eastern Germany, both players will roll a die. The USSR will add 1 to their result, as they have more influence in the country. If the US player rolls a 5 and the USSR player rolls a 2, modified to a 3, the US player can remove 2 USSR influence from Eastern Germany. Lastly, the ops points may be used to perform a coup in any country that the opposing superpower has influence in. Multiply the stability number on the country selected by 2. Roll a die and add the ops points from the card played to the roll. If the modified die roll is larger than twice the stability number, the opposing superpower loses the difference in influence. If more influence would be lost than is present, add the remaining difference in your own superpower's influence. The player performing the coup would then move their required military operations marker by the ops points value, and if the coup was performed in a battleground country, the DEFCON marker would decrease by 1. For example, if the USSR player were to coup Panama and had a modified die roll of 6, the US would lose 1 influence, and the USSR would gain 1 additional influence. The DEFCON marker would decrease by 1 as Panama is a battleground country. Note that both coups and realignments may not be performed in certain regions of the world based on the DEFCON status. A DEFCON of 3 would prevent these actions from being played in Europe and Asia. Finally, once per turn, a player may play a card to advance their token along the space race track. The ops value of the card must be equal to or greater than the value printed on the next space race track space. The player will then roll a die. If the value on the die is equal to the required value, they advance their token 1 space. Victory points are earned on some track spaces to the first or second player to reach the space, and the first player to reach some spaces will get a bonus until the second player reaches the same space. Note that the action printed on the card does not resolve regardless of the color of the star. Also recall that cards are only discarded, not removed from the game entirely, if the event is not played, even if an asterisk is present. There are several cards called scoring cards present in the game. These cards are played like any other event card. Points are earned based on the level of influence present in the region by each player. Presence is defined as controlling 1 country in the region. Domination is defined as controlling more battleground and more total countries in the region than the opposing superpower. The superpower must control at least 1 battleground and 1 non-battleground country to be considered to have domination. Control of a region is defined as controlling more countries in the region than the other player, and controlling all of the region's battleground countries. Victory points for each of these levels are printed on the map. 1 bonus point is awarded for each battleground country controlled, and another point is awarded for each controlled country that is adjacent to the enemy superpower. After all of the turn's action rounds are completed, the military operations status is checked. If your superpower's military operations status is smaller than the current DEFCON level, your opponent gains that many victory points equal to the difference between the 2 numbers. In general, each superpower will hold 1 card in their hand before beginning the next round. Each player must show each other player the bottom of this card to ensure that it is not a scoring card. Scoring cards must be played during the round that it is drawn. The USSR player begins play with the China card face up. It may be played for operations points instead of another card from your hand. When you play the China card, hand it to your opponent face down. The China card is then flipped over during this next stage of action. The turn marker is then advanced and the action round marker is returned back to the first space. If this is the end of the 10th turn, final region scoring takes place for each region. At this point, the player with the most victory points is declared the winner. Note that the player in possession of the China card at the end of the game receives 1 additional victory point. Be sure to consult the rulebook for additional rules and clarification. Thanks for watching.